thing about ideologies, in the old days when they used to fight the European wars, they just fought for good old greed, not ideology. So when they took over another country, they wouldn't destroy the statues and the buildings and stuff for ideological reasons. Marxists have this ideological thing going that they're more loyal to the ideology than life in the sense of, so this is a kind of a new kind of a thing where you elevate the ideology to God. You elevate it, the ideology, it becomes the conscience of the person. So anytime you serve the collective, this is right. Every time you don't serve the collective, it's wrong. So what we're going to look at, I am going to look at the subject of Marxism from the Vedic vision of God and the Vedic psychology as unfolded by Swami Dayananda. So there's many ways you can look at Marxism. You can look at it as a sociologist, you can look at it as a philosopher, but we're going to look at it, and we're going to, because you see, context determines meaning. So if I look at it as a philosopher, it'll have a certain meaning. If I look at it as a sociologist, it'll have a certain meaning. But I want to look at Marxism from the Vedic vision as unfolded to me by Swami Dayananda, because this gives, when you do it this way, you can clearly see the error of this Marxist collectivist thinking, and you can understand it. And it's important to understand it because our children come under the sway of it. And also, it has now become what I would call a very subversive influence in terms of cultural destruction. I think what we'll do is we'll start, first of all, with an experience I had about 15 years ago. I had a friend of mine who was English, and we were talking about what happened in the city of Dresden. Dresden is a German city, and at the end of nearing the end of the war, the Allies bombed it. And what happened was, it was a city that was a beautiful city. It was mainly old people and children. It was not a military target, but what happened was they firebombed it. And they first of all flew over, they firebombed it. And then when the ambulance come out, about 5 minutes later, they firebombed it again. And then when people tried to go to the parks where there were trees, they also bombed the trees. So I said to this guy, I said, this was a war crime. Now, this man I know to be an intelligent man, and he's actually a good man. But he said to me, it was not a war crime because they bombed Coventry. And it was striking, the fact that he was not seeing individual persons, women and children, being incinerated by firebombs. What he was seeing was that because they had the label German, he saw them as a class. So he didn't see them as individual persons. He saw that all that was happening was that Germans, the enemy, were being bombed and killed. So he was engaging in what Swami Dayananda calls objectification. In other words, he was not seeing persons, he was seeing a thing, and a thing worthy of punishment and destruction. And it surprised me, actually, but so, and in his mind, these people, because they were German, they deserved to be punished for the suffering that so-called class had inflicted on England, mainly Coventry, which was a suburb of London. Now, so what happens is that for Swami Dayananda, he made a good point. He says, to see someone as a criminal is to do violence to the person. Rather, we look at it, here is a person who is given to crime. Now, you'll notice that that's a very sane way of looking at it. It's also a very kind and compassionate way, because Swami Dayananda happened to also be a beautiful human being besides being a spiritual genius and psychological genius. And the thing with Marxism is a term which refers to a collectivist way of thinking. It's an ideology. Now, the thing is that as an ideology, it has certain reality assumptions, which in philosophy we say ontological assumptions. These are reality assumptions about what human beings are, what good is. And one of the fundamental things with Marxism is that they don't look at human beings as persons. They look at human beings in terms of what class they are. And not only that, what is important is loyalty to the ideology. What's expected is loyalty to the ideology. Now, Marxism doesn't appear always under the label of Marxism. Marxism appears as an ideology that basically has the view that one day we can create this utopian society where everyone will be happy. And this is based on the fact that they believe that human beings are a product of historical and social forces. That's what a human being is. So when I'm born in New Zealand, and that's what I am. I'm a New Zealander. I'm a product of social and historical forces. And my sense of identity that has been formed in me by social interactions and all that stuff is the being I am. That is what I am. Because, you see, fundamentally, the idea is that the human being is simply a set of psychophysical processes, is a material thing that is arranged in a certain way, and there's this thing, and it's the thing we could call a human being. So this is the thing. And to be is to be material. And that's their view. That when I'm looking at another human being, all I'm looking at is a thing made up of matter. And that consciousness is just simply a epiphenomena. It's just simply something that just arises out of this complexity. So I'm a complex thing as opposed to a cup, which is a non-complex thing. And this is what we would call materialism. But the thing that when we look at so what happens is that you get this ideology that people conform to. Now, one of the unfortunate things with this is that in Vedic psychology, we've got a desire for security. We work, this is very useful too. We've got this desire for security, one of the first strivings. And this security is very good because what happens is if a truck or a car is coming towards me, I'm going to find myself having the urge to get out of the way. So this is a very important thing. This is a striving for security. And then I also have a striving for pleasure, which is also helps me negotiate life, because when things get unpleasant, I'll start to change the environment and I'll see what's, it'll help me live my life. And as far as the Marxists go, that's all we got. We got security and pleasure. That is all there is to the human being. Whereas what was unfolded to me by Swami Dayananda is that besides the personality that has been formed in me by social conditions, which is true, psychosocial conditions that have formed my character or the form personality takes, besides that, there is myself as a simple conscious person. And myself as a simple conscious person finds expression, the dynamic form of this simple conscious person is love and care, which he calls the striving for Dharma. So that in me, I have an ethical striving. In the West, we call that the voice of conscience. I have an ethical striving, and we know this. Like, for example, when we lose our temper with our spouse, we feel remorse and regret because we have this striving. The Marxists don't recognize this at all, because there's no such thing as, first of all, a person. There's only a social identity. And secondly, there's no sense that I need to conform my life to these ethical strivings, because all I need to do is I need to conform to the collective, because the collective takes over conscience. The collective, so anything that forwards the cause is good, and anything that obstructs the cause is bad. So there's no such thing as being receptive. See, Swami Dayananda said that the voice of Dharma is the presence of God as it exists in our heart, and it gives direction to our lives. Whereas for these guys, there's no such thing. Now, I remember when I was at university, this postmodernist, that's another term for this kind of philosophy that's called Marxism, postmodernism, identity politics, doesn't matter what you call it. He stood up and he said, "There is no such thing as truth." And the whole room went quiet, like it was as if he was pronouncing something profound and something magnificent. And I couldn't resist it. I went, "Is that true, is it?" And of course, everyone laughed. He hated me, that guy. I only got a credit for that subject. But anyway, but the thing is that the philosophy is that there's no such thing as conscience. All conscience is I've got standards that have been internalized in my mind and that control me. And often they would say that this conscience also is corrupted because what I've done is I've internalized the values and standards of an oppressive class. So when we look at the individual person, from the Vedic psychological point of view, as unfolded by Swami Dayananda, is I don't conform to some external ideology. That's not where I'm going to find my happiness. I need to conform to Dharma. I need to conform my actions so that when my way of being in the world conforms to these inner dharmic strivings, then what happens is that was what leads to a good life, a good, peaceful, harmonious life. Whereas these people who are into this collectivist type thinking, whatever you call it, liberalism, humanitarianism, they've always got high noting names because it's always done in the best, in the interest of the common good, is that what they demand is that you conform to the ideology, not to your conscience. And this is a massive problem. And so as a person, I've got I am moved. Emotions mean what moves me. I'm moved by the desire for security. I'm moved by the desire for pleasure. I'm also moved in terms of Dharma. I've got a striving to be in harmony with what is and to take care, to actually take care of myself and other people. And also there's the fourth striving, which is the striving for the absolute, or the striving for God. The Marxists, as well as Western psychology in general, only recognize the first two strivings. They don't understand what it means to be a simple conscious person or to be a person. That's not everyone within our Western tradition, but generally speaking, that's the case. And in the West now, we are pervaded by this kind of collectivist thinking that is trying to transform society so that everyone will be happy. The problem is that when we go back to this, these German people, persons who had a nationality of German, women and children, you notice how that this man felt that as a class, that because they belonged to the class of the same people who bombed Coventry, they deserved a collective punishment. They were seen as bad and as evil. Now, what we're having now is that we're having an idea that what is being forwarded is that everyone is equal. Now, everyone is equal under the law, but everyone deserves a fair break. There has to be diversity and inclusiveness of everyone, which sounds very nice. I even agree with it. We should include people in our lives and we shouldn't treat them badly and all of this sort of stuff. The problem with this liberal, left-wing, Marxist thing, and by the way, when I'm talking about ideology, I also mean ideology on the right. If I'm identified with an ideology, a right-wing ideology, that's just as crazy, because I will see anybody who does not belong to my group, my ideology, is outside it and therefore evil. And so you have this crazy thing going on where you've got a popular movement, if you like, that says that there's no right and wrong. You can't know what is right and wrong. And you see, in our Western tradition, we talk about goodness, beauty, and truth. This is our traditional. And these are attributes of God. So the idea that, first of all, there's no such thing as truth. So that means that everything is to do with opinion. Everything is socially constructed. Everything I say, there's no such thing as a true statement. I'm only just simply giving an opinion that's been built into me. So there's no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as goodness. Goodness doesn't exist. That's just simply a personal opinion. And there's no such thing as beauty. So that when you see, like when you see a beautiful mountain, there's something in your heart that responds to the beauty. And there's something, there's more to it than just simply, my senses give me color and form. But what is it? Why is it in my heart? Am I moved by beauty? Now, I don't know much about the Hindu religious tradition, but you look at their religious liturgy, it's full of flowers and music, and it is quite beautiful. You know what I mean? And something in you responds to it because it's beautiful. These people don't acknowledge beauty, goodness, or truth. In fact, they are an assault against it. Well, and one of the most pernicious or the most dangerous things about this philosophy is it divides people. In other words, if you don't think with this open, inclusive idea, then you are oppressive and you're evil. And so it promotes the idea that you can righteously hate people, which is a rather strange idea, that you can look at people as things, and then you can also hate them for the right reasons, which of course, from the Vedic point of view of Dharma, that's a crazy idea, because that means that I can act violently and horribly and harmfully, but I've got a good justification. Now, whenever historically we have found when this Marxist collectivist type thinking has ever gained power, it has always been incredibly ruthless in terms of the destruction of persons. Always for the best possible reasons, of course. But the thing is that in my culture, my Western culture, the traditions that all our traditions are actually disintegrating, they've virtually gone. But there was always the idea that the human being is made in the image of likeness of God. There was a sense of the sacred. It doesn't have the strong sense of the sacred that the Indian culture preserves and keeps present, but there was always a sense of the sacred. Whereas when you're looking at the Marxist culture, there's nothing sacred in a human being. So when you slaughter millions of people for this utopian ideal, it's a right thing to do. because there's no conscience here. If you destroy the oppressive class, you know, like when that man looked at those Germans as if they were the bad guys. They honestly thought that doing that action of killing those people in Dresden was a good act because they were bad people. Likewise, when Marxism has ever taken over, there's the people who are the good guys, who belong to the collective, who are willing to conform their lives to this collective ideology. And anyone who didn't conform, they are bad. Therefore, because they're bad, it's easy to kill them. Because once you make people into things, it's very, very easy to treat them with a tremendous amount of violence and yet feel virtuous. That's the danger of Marxism. The other thing too is that for our young people, they always pitch the story. You see, they always use the way they characterize a culture. They use a tricky mechanism. You see, let's imagine that I see you do one thing that's wrong. Let's say I see you shouting at your spouse, and I go, well, that's not very. That person's a bit bad, right? What I've done is I've taken one factor that at that moment in one particular time you shouted and screamed at your spouse. And now I say, because of that, you are totally bad. Now, you'll notice that every human being you know is going to have right things about them and wrong things about them. It's a spectrum. There's no such thing as a human being who can act in the right way all the time, or every instant. But what happens is, or a person has an experience with one bad cop, one bad policeman, then they think they're all bad. So the way the Marxists work is this. They take a wrong thing that any human being would agree was a wrong thing, right? So, for example, if I treat women badly, right, they label that patriarchy. But if I treat women badly, everyone would agree that is not a good thing. But what the Marxists do is they will say that because someone treated that woman badly, it is because of the whole culture is patriarchal. Have you ever seen that thing? The sweeping generality. So that because the fact is that in every culture that I know of, human beings treat each other badly at times. Have you noticed that? That's just a fact with every culture. But what the Marxists do is they will take something that's wrong or that keeps on recurring and say, because of that wrong thing, the whole culture is bad. It's a patriarchal, evil culture. Now, and there's a certain logic to it, and young people can get suckered into this. They can believe the story because there are Indians, men who treat their woman badly. There are Australian men who do the same thing. There are American men who do the same thing. But that is the problem of human beings treating each other badly. Because when I fall away from Dharma, when I cease to be loving, to that degree I tend to become hostile. When I cease to be caring, to that degree I become incompassionate and indifferent. This is a universal problem. And so when you look at a culture and you superimpose it's patriarchal or it's the caste system, what happens is when you reduce it to an idea, it can then become an object of hate. And it's a form of collective slander. It's a little bit like if I get accused of being a child molester and people believe it, everything I say is nullified. Do you understand? It's just nullified because I've been slandered. So the same way, how they attack a culture is through this type of slander. Now, I have never met any culture, and I've studied sociology, that doesn't have stratification. Every culture I know, the English who use this caste system thing to control India, the biggest caste system you could imagine. They were just a completely hierarchical culture that had things. So the thing is that, and the one of the great problems with the collectivist thinking is that our cultural traditions and our customs and our culture, they have a profound effect on people psychologically. Because if I don't feel grounded, if I don't have, see, culture has a very strong protective function. It helps people live their lives. Now, I'll tell you a story about what happened in New Zealand. The majority of people, even though the Maori people are a minority in the culture, a lot of them are in jail, and a large percentage are Maori. And this little old lady, about 20 years ago, she went into the jails, and here were these big mongrel black power type people, tattoos and stuff like that. Here's this little old lady. She went in there, and what she did is she taught them their culture. She taught them the hakas. She taught them how to do the carving. She taught them the singing. And so what happened was these young Maori boys who felt alienated within a white Anglo-Saxon culture felt a sense of identity they could relate to. And the percentage of when they left the jails of reoffending went down to about 5% instead of being about 40%. So culture is extremely important. So when you get young Indians who are kind of, you have the onslaught of so-called Western culture. It's a bit of a misnomer actually, because culture means growth. I'm not sure that it's much of a culture now, but it's certainly it's a consumer type thing. This culture, our so-called Western culture, assaults indigenous cultures. And we are experiencing a tremendous amount of psychological travail because we haven't really got a culture now. All our cultural forms have disintegrated, and there's a sense of emptiness and no sense of place and all of this sort of stuff. This is why Swami Dayananda's understanding of the Vedic vision of God and living a life of Dharma is, I believe, our salvation. But that's another issue. But the thing that's important here is that if our young people come under the sway of this atheistic secular culture that says there's no God, there's no spirituality, the meaning of life is to have many kicks as, until you carcack. It's a major problem. And so, but the Marxist agenda is to destroy what they consider oppressive. And they consider traditional values like family, like God, all of these things as an oppressive factor that needs to be eradicated so people can become free. And so they have to free the young people from this terrible, toxic culture that's, in Indian case, it's just the caste system, it's patriarchal, it's bad, it's evil, it's blah, blah. So this is a very strong influence. It's had a tremendously strong influence in our intellectual, or in our faculties in the universities, because what it's done is it's come into the education people, the law people, the journalists. So it's sort of spread a great deal. And so what happens is that it's a subversive force, really, in the sense that when people come under the sway of it, they start to look at their own culture through the eyes of it. And then what happens is, it's not that they're doing this deliberately or that they're bad people. It's just simply that the way they're seeing the world is now they'll see their own culture as something maybe evil. Now, in every culture, there are people who do evil acts. Would you say that's true? So that's with every culture. But what happens is, from instead of the issue being that human beings treat each other wrongly and the solution to this is living a life of Dharma, what it becomes is we're the virtuous ones because we believe in equality and a beautiful society, a utopian ideal. And because of that, everyone else who doesn't believe this is evil. Now, you know, the thing about when you look at a society through a completely, perfectly utopian lens, every society is going to look bad. Now, when I came back from India and I come to Australia, and I heard people complaining about the Australian culture, we're highly privileged, we're very, very lucky. It just doesn't wash. But even this wonderful culture that we have here that's prosperous and whatever, if you measure it against an utopian ideal, it can look incredibly bad. And this is how they propagate their message. Anyway, that's so any questions about this?
I liked the way you related it to the Indian reservation system and the Indian division of castes, the way the castes are divided, and some are privileged and some are not these days. I would like you to share that.
Okay, I'd never heard until I talked to you. I never knew about the reservation system. But this is an example of the fact that because you belong to a privileged class by birth, you are you're no longer a person who can be afforded and treated justly. You have to be treated in terms of the fact that you're privileged, therefore you have an advantage over other people. You're also part of probably an oppressive class as well as that. And so therefore you are not afforded the same rights as other people of a different class. So this objectification of you as a person into a thing, that's the reservation system is like it's institutionalized now, that type of objectification. And that's what I would say is not only it's unjust and it's adamic because it does violence to you as a person. And the other thing is this, is, you know, the real or imagined wrongs of the caste system, of the Brahmins. Are you as a person responsible for the fact that 50 years ago, certain people acted or treated other people from a lower class in a bad way? Are you responsible for that? But when I think in terms of identity politics, you are. And you deserve the punishment due to your class. That's how the thinking works.
So the corollary also works, no? Because you are a backward class and your ancestors 500 years ago were not treated rightly.
Yep.
So now you get all the privileges. When we become independent, you get a caste system. Now it is your fourth generation, which is you get the reservation. And now it's fourth generation who's reaping the benefits of the reservation and the subsidies and the money, and they're actually richer. And if I look around, the lowest jobs, the most menial jobs, cleaning of toilets in our public toilets, which are Sulabh Shauchalaya, 80% of the sweepers, toilet cleaners are Brahmins. So
well,
it has worked in the reverse now.
Yes. Now that's
categorization.
That's a very interesting point. The fact that there are some people in America saying that because I'm black and because my forebears have been treated so badly, I deserve reparation. Now, that's based on the thing that I am my social identity. You see, so if it's true that they are their social identity, the confusion in the thinking is that because they were treated badly 50 years ago, that's a whole different set of people. It's the same label, but we're talking about different people. And so the thing is that the problem with ideologies, either left or right, is as soon as you look at a person as a thing, you have ceased what Swami Dayananda, you've ceased to see the person. You do violence to the person. And it's a terribly violent way of looking at people, because it always results in injustice. Why should you be penalized for the real or imagined wrongs of people 50 years ago?
You said that we suffer. So this is due to our karma. If we destroy one culture, we have to adopt any culture. So what do this Marxists think of it?
So he has two questions. One is that the Marxists believe that culture, all the old tradition, is bad. So they ask you to give up the culture, but what do they offer instead of that? Instead of your culture, what is it that they offer? And
Well, can we answer that first?
yes, answer that first.
They offer a utopian culture where everyone will be happy and peaceful, because it's just and equal. Everyone is lovely and harmonious. In other words, they offer blue sky for nothing. It's just nothing. It's what they offer is a utopian ideal that is not possible to create, based on the thing that, because the society creates the individual and determines whether they're happy or not, which is not true. Only wisdom actually confers happiness. The thing is that that's what they offer in terms of that. So they don't offer anything except this ideal, this social ideal of utopian. And they always offer it as a future thing, by the way. It's always for the new world order. When Trotsky was asked, they said to him, the 6 million Russians have died so far. He says, yes, but that's for that's for the new world order. This is what needs to happen. It's sad, but it's necessary. So they offer a utopian society which can never be brought about, because human beings, when they fall away from Dharma, they can be relied upon to act badly. Whether you're Indian, whether you're New Zealander, American, Australian, Chinese, doesn't matter. The universal rule applies.
One of the things Bertrand Russell said about Marxism is that it is a Christian heresy. So I would like you to explain a little bit about typological similarities, if there are any, between prophetic monotheistic traditions and Marxism.
Well, first of all, I've done some sociology. I like Bertrand Russell in a sense, right? The thing is that there's a Christian Judaic ideal, which is the brotherhood of man. Okay, so that but the thing is that it says that man is united in the sense that we're all children of God, right? But and of course, if we recognize ourselves as a child of God, it would make a big difference in terms of our behavior, actually. But what the Marxists do is they say, yes, we take this so-called Christian ideal, and what we do is we say, have you ever heard of when you deal with these kind of Marxist types, they always talk about compassion and caring for people and creating a fair world and all of this stuff. You're familiar with this? So this, I think this is in the sense that he would have, I haven't read his particular article on this, but I'd say that that's what he's talking about, that it's a spin-off of the Christian Judaic ideal of the brotherhood of man. However, it doesn't produce the whole methodology of Marxism is you first of all create two opposing groups that fight each other in order for the suppressed group to overcome the oppressors, and so that the whole game is power. It's never dialogue. It's never brotherhood, actually. What their methodology in order to attain power is to create fractions or divisiveness between people.
This is about the importance attached to identities, as you explained by Marxist. So the point is that every society groups people according to identities. For instance, people have citizens with certain privileges, non-citizens that don't have those privileges. So this is pretty much operational and in many ways useful.
Yes, there's always stratification of roles, always in every culture.
Yes. So how do you then view the Marxist view of identities as especially harmful as relative to any other kind of identity that has been used over centuries?
The thing about ideologies, in the old days when they used to fight the European wars, they just fought for good old greed, not ideology. So when they took over another country, they wouldn't destroy the statues and the buildings and stuff for ideological reasons. Marxists have this ideological thing going that they're more loyal to the ideology than life in the sense of, so this is a kind of a new kind of a thing where you elevate the ideology to God. You elevate it, the ideology, it becomes the conscience of the person. So anytime you serve the collective, this is right. Every time you don't serve the collective, it's wrong. So it's devoid of any, it's a kind of like a, because the solution is ideological and because the solution is going to, the means become sacred, if you like.
The means become sacred.
Yes. It's like we have a monk, St. Thomas Aquinas, and he said that you have a means towards an end. So religion is a means towards an end. It's a means to bring about a knowledge of God. When that means becomes the end, when the instrument becomes all important, you'll hate anybody that doesn't adhere to the instrument. Okay, I don't disagree. It would be lovely if we had a society that was fair and just, that wasn't full of killing and violence. I think that'd be a great idea. Most people will agree with that. But what they do is they say, we are the way to attain this. Therefore, anybody that does not abide by this are fascist. I mean, this is what you get often.
When we come out of the school and just enter into the university environment, first year, second year, we are introduced to this idea of Marxism, and it is sold as if whatever wrongs in our society, the divide in the class, is because of the inherent, it has some internal wrongs, and that can be only tackled with the Marxism. And at that point of time, as a listener, as a student, we do not think this very deeply, and we just buy this idea with the face value. And by the time we start thinking deeply about it, we are out of the university environment, and our social outreach is limited. Newer generations will be falling into the same trap in a similar fashion. And I don't see any new waves of ideologies or set of people who are working against it or trying to tackle the problem at its root.
You can't fight them with the methods that they use. If you become hateful, and it's like, have you seen people on the left and the right fighting each other? Do you know what I mean? You can't have what St. Thomas Aquinas says you can't have a wrong means to a right end. So the thing is that I've found when I've talked to Western people about, for example, Swami Dayananda, I've talked to a group of clinicians, psychotherapists and psychologists or whatever. When you show the value of something, when you show that, that the human being is not just simply the personality, which is formed by social and historical forces, but the basic person, the basic conscious person, has a different origin than physical matter, and has ethical strivings. What happens is it's like, I'm sure you've heard of the metaphor of the snake and the rope, that the way to make the snake disappear is to point to the rope. See, there's a rope, there's a rope, there's a rope. Look at that, there's a rope. Oh my goodness, there's a rope there. You see, but it doesn't mean being passive in the sense that when people bring things up, for example, is it true that if I create a society around me that's happy, do you think suddenly I become, first of all, a loving human being who's caring at all times? That's stupid. That's ridiculous. Do you know what I mean? Because Swami Dayananda says that emotional growth is self-initiated. And this is based on how we see human beings. I think what's important is we educate by, what Swami Dayananda do is he would just shed light on life. He would just shed light so you could see what was true. And so this is different from opposing, but I think it's important to denounce error. You know what I mean? When you come across the philosophy that there's no such thing as right and wrong, that, you know, you can say, well, you know, I don't think that's right. You know what I mean? And you can say why. Do you know what I mean? When there's, you know, so it's a very, in our Western philosophical tradition, we got the Socratic dialogue, you know, so some young person says, oh, you know, we want to create a lovely society or whatever, you know, it's a caste system. And you say, well, what do you mean by a caste system? Well, it's got stratification. Well, what culture doesn't have stratification? And then, and when they say, well, yeah, but the Brahmins have suppressed the lower classes. Well, what do you mean by Brahmins? You know, I mean, you're looking at individual people. What does that mean? Every single Brahmin has actually treated people from a lower class as bad. So when you get specific, the saying is that the knowledge of the truth will set you free. I think what's necessary is what we call in the West defensive metaphysics. You have to see what the disease is, but you have to form approaches where you can show the error and the fallacy of it through dialogue. Because you're not going to beat these people ideologically, otherwise you're just going to have a war. But I think it's very necessary that there has to be some form of resistance, but the resistance has to be through communicating and dialogue, we don't want to become what we behold. Do you know what I mean? We don't want to hate these people. We just understand that they're under a certain way of seeing. And what we want to do is get into communication with them. And when they use those generalities, we go, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean it's a patriarchal society? Does that mean that every man in India treats their wife bad? Well, no. Oh, okay, what? So some treat them well, do that? Well, yes. So you break these sweeping generalities so that they can see that they're looking at their whole culture, which contains so many factors, so many diverse things. To take that whole culture and put it in the frame of one single concept, that's madness. And it's evidentially untrue. Can't be true.
I just wanted to build up upon the previous question and answers that came about. So a lot of the Marxist ideologies are, I would say, fed into the brain cells of young students at the university level, mainly through the sociology and history platforms. Yes. So a lot of the members of academia, especially in countries such as India and also in the West, given the departments of Indic studies, etc., tend to possess the same ideologies, right? So, it's difficult to counter that. But if you just look at the history of Marxist-based societies, it starts with anarchy, it ends with dictatorship, and followed by a subsequent rebuilding. So I was just curious as to find out that, the history is right out there. Why can't someone just take a look at it and present an alternative viewpoint? I wouldn't say it's an alternative viewpoint, it's a realistic critique, because I think that's something that's lacking, because everybody looks at Marxism as a utopian principle, and it's not. I mean, other than China, all these societies have failed, and China, for whatever it's worth, is essentially a capitalist society engulfed in a military dictatorship masquerading as Marxism. So I would just like to know your opinion about that.
Okay, there's two things. You see, what happened was there was economic Marxism, and after Solzhenitsyn come out with his book, The Gulag, right? It was become very clear that the Stalinist thing was a terrible thing. The Maoist thing was a terrible thing. So then the French intellectuals, what they did was they did a kind of a sleight of hand, and then they decided, instead of the class structure between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, they started to talk in terms of cultural Marxism. In other words, cultural change, cult ideas, if you like, right? So whereas one was economic Marxism that tried to bring about, the centralization of distribution and production, what the story was now was to bring about a cultural change, to change it in the way people see, and to be able to look at the culture in terms of factions and identities fighting each other, and one is privileged and one's not privileged. So it's a different ball game than the Marxism of old. It's basically it's a kind of a war of the minds and hearts, and it has the best way for, you know, when you're helping young people look at this, you got to look at it like a religion. That's what it is. It's like a religion. So it's got to set you got to be a believer, and you love fellow believers, and you hate the ones that don't believe it. And it's a noble cause now. You know, it's a noble cause. Social activism. We're going to create a nice society. Now, no one disagrees with working hard to create a fair and equitable society. Is that true? No one would disagree with that. But these guys aren't into that. These guys are into controlling, gaining power through winning hearts and minds to conform to an ideology. And so it's now what we call cultural Marxism. It's not economic Marxism. Does that?
Hello, sir. So that was a great session. I have one question based on an observation which I could make out. So I'd like to start with observation, and then I'd like to ask my question. Mm-hmm. So my understanding has basically been that Marxism as an ideology is able to influence people, especially youngsters, because it simplifies the apparent understanding of the problems, by drawing a very simple binary categorization. Say it can be like, rich or poor, haves or have-nots, or to draw parallel, a believer and a non-believer. This ideology, once entrenched in young minds, what I notice is that there is merely a sense to outrage more and more rather than have a solution for a given issue. So in other words, it is easier and lazier to outrage, draw false equivalences, because false equivalence is something which we find huge in the Indian context, in the current political context, in the current cultural context. I mean, you tend to do a false equivalence, you tend to, become lazier and, intellectually incompetent to outrage rather than think dharmically or rationally, because that is not straightforward. So no wonder in general, elitism and Marxism, which are apparently contradictory to each other, they go hand in hand. But the people who actually get influenced by it do not question it. So coming to the question, what exactly, I mean, given this entire background of how exactly Marxism as an ideology, lures the youth, and, how they, influence or brainwash the youth, what can be done to ensure that, our youth do not get into such toxic ideologies?
Okay, now can we look at this from the psychology of Swami Dayananda? Okay, because you see, for Swami Dayananda, I used to be upset about the fact that I was unhappy. I thought there was something deep down inside me that was wrong, right? But what he gave me an understanding of was that if in our Western scriptures, we have the idea of the vine and the branches. So if the branch is cut off from reality or God, it withers, doesn't it? If the branch is cut off from the vine. So human beings, Swami Dayananda says, suffer from a basic thing. They're cut off from reality. So they're incredibly fearful, like really fearful, consciously or unconsciously. And they're self-hating. He called it self-dissatisfaction. I hate being what I'm like. Now, the problem is that, and this expresses itself with a feeling of guilt, a feeling of badness. I am bad. I'm talking about a being guilt, not a guilt for a specific action. And this is a tremendous problem for human beings. So here I am, I'm feeling bad. I'm feeling like a bad person. Now, when I can take that badness and I can project it onto other people, have you noticed that human beings have a tremendous urge, like what you're saying, to be outraged at the wrongness of other people, right? What I'm doing is I'm defending myself against this fundamental self-dissatisfaction. This is why it's such a delicious thing. I'm given a defense where I can feel virtuous, I can feel innocent, I can feel like I've solved the problem by hating others, by condemning others. Now, when you look at human life, Swami Dayananda says the basic dynamics of the human being are guilt and hurt. Hurt people want to hurt. So when you're hurt, you notice how you want to retaliate? So here's a young person, they got various hurts. Everyone has hurt. Everyone has an accumulation. They can suddenly express their hostility and rage in the most noblest of fashion. So what they're looking at is this, unfortunately, is projected self-hatred. Do you see what I mean? So when I hate other people, when I have this desire to attack, have you seen people in social life attack each other either openly or through character assassination behind their back? This points to what Swami Dayananda says, this intrinsic hurt, this hurt centered on me. Have you seen people enjoy finding fault and criticizing others for their real or imagined wrongnesses? It's they literally have a desire to find fault. So unfortunately, so here I am, I'm 16 years old. I feel like a bit miserable. I feel kind of bad. Do you know what I mean? And suddenly I can join the white hats. I can join the group of the virtuous, and I can hate the sinners. It's an old story. It's happened throughout our religious tradition in the West. So what happens is those young people, it is such a wonderful thing to feel virtuous because I'm lifted out of this tremendous burden of guilt, and then I can attack others. For Swami Dayananda, the only thing that's going to resolve that urge is if I resolve self-dissatisfaction, I hate being what I'm like, and the fear. And we're going to be later on talking about Swami Dayananda's psychology, because this is what people I work with, this is how, unless what changes, what moves people undergoes a change, there's no change. So Marxism is incredibly appealing because it's a dramatization of tremendous self-hatred, and it works exceedingly well. That's one of the problems with it. And that's why it's so attractive to young people, because they can sit together and they can come together and they can talk about how bad everything is and how bad other people are and stuff like that. I don't know whether, I mean, I've done that. I've talked with a group of people and felt, who's experienced that feeling of righteous indignation and feeling righteously pure by criticizing others? It's quite obvious, isn't it? So the Marxists make this an art form. So it's a hard one, Prashant.
See, we have two things. That we have social reforms and we have Marxist ideology. So my question is that then today when we see them, many of us tell the social reformist as a Marxist, and the real Marxist, as we can say, you can say them, they are the social reformer. So this is a very, you can say, very small line. So what's how to identify this line? Because there are many people who are working for the social reform. They don't know about Marxism, anything, but they are working on their way that there should be a reform in our society. So what's the line?
Yeah, the Marxism doesn't necessarily come under the name of Marxism. It's an ideology that basically says that that there are good guys and bad guys. They tend to look at, you see, working for social reform is a duty. Swami Dayananda created schools for lots of children who lived out in the country and stuff. Do you know what I mean? So social reform is very important. The Marxists believe that social reform is the solution to our problems. Okay, that what will create a happy world. Swami Dayananda would say that I, as an individual, that the change is centered in the heart of the individual. So what moves me, when I'm moved by love and care, then what happens is I stop dramatizing the hatred and the ruthlessness that comes from not living a dharmic life. So it all depends on where you see the problem. If you see the problem as external to you, okay, it's those people over there, and if we create that world, life's going to be happy. Whereas if you understand that happiness is an individual thing in one sense, it's centered on the person, and the religious traditions of Hinduism offer a way to come into conscious contact with God, which is a very good thing. So the thing is that, and they have an understanding of Dharma, so that the individual knows that, you know, I need to live my life in the light of Dharma and have a way of being in the world. That is the solution to humanity's problems. Whereas these guys think that the solution is the superimposition of a so-called social structure which will make everything better. It's never resulted in that. When they get into power, they are ruthless. And at the moment, they don't cut off their heads. They just digitally slaughter people, Galatine people. Do you know what I mean? They cancel them. Do you know what I mean? And what the other thing is, they don't like dissent. So you can tell whether or not, by when you're talking to a person, whether you're talking to a person who's under the sway of an ideology or a person who wants social reform. You can talk to them. If they're not identified with that, they'll talk to you. They won't have this thing, the Brahmins are this or that. They're not going to be speaking in generalities. They're going to be a person relating to another person. But when you're associated with an ideology, you will fall into hatred, no doubt about it. And if you say something, if you disagree with them, they will hate you. And there's nothing you can do about that. You can't do anything about that. It's fundamentally the difference between a social solution and a religious one.
I wanted to add on something when you were talking about the righteous rage we feel. I think that applies to almost everything, because we have this unmet need of expressing rage. So even when we were talking about the title of this talk, months ago when we first met, and I was discussing with some people threat of Marxism, they sounded much more interested in the talk than when I said it is a cognitive distortion.
Yes.
So when I say it's threatening you.
One of the things you said early on in the talk was that the materialistic philosophy makes people less empathic. So I would think that it is strictly not true, because you can be a materialist, but that doesn't really tell you to go and beat up your neighbor. And secondly, I would also like your comments on heresies within Marxism, because you mentioned Trotsky. I thought that would be some useful information for our listeners. Thank you.
Well, first of all, with as far as that you're right. A person can be an atheist, but the movement of Dharma is still active in them. All right, so that a person, I mean, you know, there are some atheists I know who are a lot more dharmic than good Christians. You know what I mean? So when I say when I talk about materialism, I'm saying that if you are facing a person, you might find it hard to slaughter millions of people like Pol Pot did, like what's the name? And I'm not actually qualified and not knowledgeable enough to answer about Trotsky and I'm not familiar enough with the historical development of Marxism to answer that other question of yours.
Because we as Bharatiyas, as Hindus, we are born and brought up with this concept of the righteous wars in the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana. So we somehow, when we hear this righteous war of the oppressed over the suppressed over the oppressor, the normal local people who get caught up with it in the college, in their college days, and genuinely feel it is right, because we are brought up with this wonderful concepts of fighting against what's wrong. We tend to take to this psychologically.
Yes, because the whole point about Dharma, the whole point about the Gita was the upholding of Dharma. Now, what transforms the world? There are people like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King who denounce evil. They're not dramatizing their self-hatred, but they are being square and upfront and saying this is wrong, this is not right. Now, this is very important. The thing is that, and when we see that the presence of Dharma embodied in a person's life, that is like a light, isn't it, in a world of darkness. It's very, very important. And I think you guys call it Sanatana Dharma, don't you? Yeah. So the thing is that this truly is the solution to the world's problems. When I solve the world's problems, the greed and the hatred existing in me, and I live a life of Dharma, I am solving the world's problem as it exists in me. That's a very good thing to do, isn't it? So, but if I don't deal with myself, what will happen is I won't like myself. What the psychodynamic people say is I will repress the fact that I'm self-hating, and what you repress, you project, and then you will hate others because of the fact that you haven't acknowledged the fact that you have a duty to live a life of Dharma and learn to it. Living a life of Dharma is not easy. I mean, if it was easy, everyone would do it. But we have to, for Swami Dayananda, we have to learn to live a life of Dharma. Does that make sense? But he was not, Swami Dayananda wasn't a wimp. Do you know what I mean? Like I remember him, we were doing a class, and I was used to him as this beautiful man. He's not, soft and lovely, and all that stuff, right? I just loved him. And then he had to do this video, and he was talking about the temples, and he was talking about paying money to the government or something. Do you know what I mean? He became a bloody lion. Like, it was unbelievable. It was like, I thought, what's happening here? Because he just looked into the camera and he said, I can't remember what he said, but it was like, this is not right. This is dada, and we're not going to have it somehow. So, we were, I'd never seen that side of him. He wasn't angry or hateful. It wasn't based on self-hatred. It was actually based on, he was doing his duty of improving social conditions, of being just, creating a just situation. Does that help with that?
Absolutely. I get the point that we need to understand and study actually what is dharma, what exactly we need to understand the term, and before being deracinated and applying it, as a sweeping statement on anything that we see which likens to whatever is happening in our epics, I think we need to understand the concept first, and we need to stand up for what is right, and we can be soft at the same time. So I really get that point, what you say. And in fact, Karl Marx is, one of his teachers, Heil, was a heavy critic of the Gita. He really dived into the Gita, and he used to pull out. So I think somehow there was something that was manipulated from that book, the Gita as well, to try and influence people. That's what I read when I was reading it.
Well, yeah, the Marxists will use whatever. They will always use the most noblest of sentiments to first of all enroll the hearts and minds. But where you see it's they demand obedience to the ideology. A religious person sees that their duty is to conform their actions to the dharmic strivings that exist in our heart. Do you see what I mean? So, and that's a different game. And that means that I will denounce evil, but I'm not doing it on the basis of projection in the sense of self-hatred. Do you know what I mean? I'm doing what Dayananda calls the needful. And when we do some more discussion, I'm going to be going into Swami Dayananda's beautiful psychology, because it changes what moves us. Does that make sense? You know how we can sometimes be moved by wanting to be liked and admired? It's much better to be moved by wanting to be in harmony, be moved by love. For Dayananda, acceptance is love. So to be moved by goodwill, it's much better, because then we act rightly. Have you noticed that if you're full of ill will, you tend to act wrongly? Or if you cease to be caring, you tend to be a little bit indifferent and ruthless? That's all our problems. But what Swami Dayananda pointed out was an approach to life in which you start to become moved by Dharma, not by what he calls binding desires.
Given the Indian cultural context, we have our epics of Ramayana and Mahabharata. And as you had, sir, rightly differentiated how exactly, the concept of, fighting for dharma can be misinterpreted very easily, and, can be taken advantage by the Marxists, by such toxic ideologies to, further their own agenda. So given this, I mean, my question was about to be like, given the Indian cultural context, how exactly can we ensure that our youth do not get lured towards this? So, but then I
Okay,
guess
now-
you kind of answered it by
No,
telling that.
I'm gonna tell you another thing, which later on, because we're going to do some more on Dayananda's psychology, but I'll just give you a little bit of a thing on it. And what he said was this. You see, notice how our mind tends to follow what we love, right? So what he talked about was that when I discover the value of living a harmonious life in the light of Dharma, because he says you can't preach. He said preaching doesn't work. You have to show the value of the value. So for example, when I'm dealing with married couples, right? How valuable is it, for example, for you to live harmoniously with your spouse? How valuable is that? Very valuable. But that value has to become valuable to me before it moves me. Is that true? So it's an approach. This is why I find Swami Dayananda's psychology. I talk to all kinds of people now, right? The very fact that when you show what he says, when the value of the value becomes valuable to you, it's your value, right? So he has an approach that we can go into in another session, if you like. But when you're dealing with young people, you have to show the value of the tradition. They're not going, if you don't show the value, they'll go, oh, yeah, forget it. But if they understand that their happiness, their real happiness is at stake, because in our Western tradition, we have a guy called Saint Augustine. Forget about what his theology said, but he made a beautiful prayer. You know what he said? Thou hast made us for yourself, O Lord, and we are restless until we rest in thee. Everybody you know has a longing for God. They may suppress it, do you know what I mean? And like Freud did, and then because he resisted it, even his own theory says he must have had a hidden attraction to it, the fact that he's so upset about it, right? Everybody has a longing for God. And everyone has a longing for Dharma, actually, believe it or not. So when they start to, it's only by satisfying the longing for Dharma and the longing for God can we be happy. You can muck around with security and pleasure and making money and, you know what I mean, and, all of this sort of stuff. But that is not going to give you a meaningful life. So it's a question of the discovery of what is truly good. What is truly good. So instead of an ideology that's put up there, this is your solution, peoples. Do you know what I mean? Right? Once it's understood that I cannot find the truly good unless I start to live in harmony with Dharma. Do you know what I mean? And unless I come into conscious contact with God, that helps a great deal. And that's where Swami Dayananda is brilliant. He unfolded the Vedic vision of God for a Western person like me. I'm not a Hindu. Do you know what I mean? And yet he had this remarkable ability. But anyway, thank you very much for putting up listening to this Westerner.